June 22, 1941. A morning like any other across the vast stretches of Eastern Europe. But beneath the stillness, a storm was brewing, one that would change the course of history forever. In the dead of night, 3 million German soldiers, the greatest invasion force the world had ever seen, stood ready along the border of the Soviet Union. The world's largest army was about to cross into the heart of a country that had never anticipated such an attack. This was Operation Barbarossa, a name that would soon be etched in blood, as Nazi Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union. But this was only day one of a war that would last almost 4 years, a war that would reshape the world, alter the course of World War II, and leave a legacy of death and destruction. This is the story of that first day, when the Germans crossed the border, and the world began to change forever. The night of June 21, 1941, was unusually quiet along the Soviet-German border. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler and his generals prepared for what they believed would be the decisive blow in their quest for global domination. For years, the Soviet Union had been a thorn in Germany's side, a giant to the east that would soon be crushed under the weight of Nazi power. But the Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin, remained in denial, despite repeated warnings. He refused to believe that Hitler would dare attack his country. His spies and his advisors all said the same thing: it is impossible. The Germans are too focused on the West. But Hitler was determined. After defeating France in 1940, he turned his eyes eastward, toward the resources of the Soviet Union and the destruction of communism. The plan was simple. Operation Barbarossa would strike hard, fast, and deep, a blitzkrieg that would break the Soviet Union into pieces before it could respond. Little did they know, this was a war Hitler would lose, not because of military failure, but because of overconfidence and miscalculations. At 03:15 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the world's largest military invasion began. German bombers, Stuka dive bombers, unleashed a wave of destruction across Soviet airfields. In the blink of an eye, Soviet aircraft were destroyed on the ground, unable to even take off and fight back. At the same time, German infantry and tanks surged across the border in a coordinated attack. The war on the Eastern Front had begun, and Stalin's greatest fear was realized. Thousands of Soviet soldiers, caught off guard in their camps, had no chance to resist. The Blitzkrieg was brutal, fast, and overwhelming. The Germans advanced in waves, infantry, artillery, and tanks moving in sync like a well-oiled machine, overwhelming everything in their path. In the early hours, Soviet commanders scrambled to organize a defense, but it was too late. German tanks rolled through villages, and artillery pounded every Soviet position it could find. The Soviet Union was not prepared. Their troops were scattered and poorly equipped for such a sudden attack. The Air Force was decimated before it could take off, and the Red Army had been caught in the open. The German strategy was brilliant in its simplicity, a fast-moving, combined arms assault designed to cripple Soviet forces before they could react. The spearhead of the attack was the Panzer divisions, fast-moving armored units that could break through defenses and quickly surround enemy forces. Behind them, the infantry moved in to clear up the resistance. The Luftwaffe, German Air Force, provided critical air support, strafing Soviet positions and disrupting their ability to coordinate a defense. This was Blitzkrieg at its peak. Speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. The Germans didn't just attack, they decimated. They didn't give the Soviets a chance to regroup. As the Germans pushed east, they tore through Soviet defenses, capturing entire divisions and cutting off supply lines. It was a blitzkrieg with one goal: to destroy everything in its path. For Stalin, the invasion was an unthinkable betrayal. He had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler in 1939, a non-aggression treaty, and had relied on it to keep the Soviet Union safe from the German threat. But Hitler's betrayal left Stalin in shock. He had ignored all the warnings, refusing to believe that the Germans would ever attack. The Soviet Union's response was chaotic. At first, there was no coordinated defense. Soldiers were unprepared, and many commanders were still waiting for orders that never came. Some Soviet units fought back fiercely, but they were overwhelmed by the speed of the German advance. The civilian population was also caught in the crossfire. As the German forces moved deeper into Soviet territory, millions of people were forced to flee their homes, either retreating into the heart of Russia or being captured by the advancing Wehrmacht. Soviet tanks, lacking fuel, were destroyed or abandoned in the field. Infantry units, outnumbered and poorly equipped, were overwhelmed by the speed and precision of the German assault. By the end of the first day, the Germans had made staggering progress. They had already taken vast areas of Soviet territory, including key airfields and railroads. The Blitzkrieg had claimed its first victories, but the price was steep. The Germans had suffered casualties too. Every tank and every soldier in the front line had to deal with the brutal conditions of the Soviet landscape. The harsh summer heat and the vast distances were a constant drain on German forces. The further they advanced, the more difficult it became to maintain supply lines. But the Soviet Union was reeling. The cost of war was already being paid in blood, and the first day's events would set the stage for the next 4 years of brutal conflict. Day 1 was just the beginning. The Germans had crossed into Soviet territory, but they had only scratched the surface of a much larger war. Stalin's response was coming, but it would take time, and the Soviet Union had more men, more land, and more willpower than the Germans could have ever anticipated. In the coming days, the Germans would be tested by the harshness of the Soviet landscape, by the fierce determination of Soviet soldiers, and by the resilience of an entire nation that had no choice but to fight. The battle for the Soviet Union had just begun. It would be the longest, deadliest, and most costly campaign in history. On June 22, 1941, the world changed. Operation Barbarossa had begun, and the fate of nations, armies, and millions of people would be determined in the coming years of war.